Cash Flow Diary Podcast, episode 427.
Welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast, the podcast that teaches you insider tips, tactics, and strategies for creating leverage streams of cash flow into your life. Learn from top-performing entrepreneurs, business owners, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe as they share their secrets to success. Like what you learn on this and other Cash Flow Diary podcast episodes? Go to learninvestingnow.com and sign up to receive powerful tips and information that will help you succeed as an entrepreneur and investor. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, educator, speaker, author, and master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow game, Jay Massey.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Cash Flow Diary Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Massey, and I'm glad that you're here today because here's what I know. What I know about you is that you are on this journey to build the cash flow. Whether you're at zero or you're at 7 figures, it doesn't matter. You're still building. And here's one of the things that you're going to encounter on this journey. Well, we all know that our journey starts out with great excitement, right? And everything is fine so long as I don't experience an obstacle. We can keep going. But what happens when you experience an obstacle? More importantly, an obstacle so large that you think, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to come over that one. Well, I have with me today someone who I think will be able to help you see that obstacles of all kinds can be absolutely overcome. Not just overcome, but you can learn to not just survive, but also thrive as well. I have with me today none other than Janine Shepherd. She's a former Olympic skier turned pilot, which, you know, guys, I get excited about. And her career as an athlete ended when she suffered a life-threatening injury when hit by a truck during a training bike ride. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never been hit by a truck. You got to understand, one of the things that we hold dear, all of us as humans, is health and our ability to go out there and make things happen, even more so if you're an athlete. So if you've ever experienced a setback, downturn, and was wondering, can I do it? Do I have what's inside? I think today's guest is going to be there to help you. In fact, she's wrote a book about it, Defiant. A broken body is not a broken person, and you may even be familiar with her from her TED Talk, same title. So let's welcome and listen, Janine Shepard. Janine, you there?
Yes, I am. Hi, Jay. It's a pleasure to be talking to you.
I am excited that you are here. Would you like to know why?
Oh, well, firstly, maybe it's got something to do with flying.
Well, that's true. It
I
does.
didn't know that you wanted to fly, but that's cool.
I do desire to one day have my own pilot's license. I have flown an airplane once briefly when I was over the skies in Belize, but it's on your website. It says speaker, author, change agent, and it's the change agent that I absolutely appreciate. It tells me that you have a purpose, and I think we're going to change people today. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. But they have to want to change. Let's get that right.
I agree.
Let's get that straight. You can't force someone to do something, but I think that hopefully when they hear my story, that will give them the inspiration to make the change in their life to, head them in the right direction.
Excellent. So let's get started. So this being your first time here, I have to ask you the same question that I tend to ask everybody the first time that they're here. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. I tend to look at today's entrepreneurs a lot like yesterday's superheroes. Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, etc. And I think entrepreneurs and superheroes have a ton of things in common. Chief among them, occasionally, as an entrepreneur, we can envision ourselves as flying through the sky, and maybe we're wearing capes and tights and saving our customers from themselves using our products and services. But also, like a superhero, an entrepreneur has a beginning. So if you think about Spider-Man, for example, there was a time where he was just a regular kid going to school, trying to get good grades, and taking some photos for the newspaper, trying to make sure he had some lunch money. And then one day, he gets bit by a spider and discovers that he's got a newfound superhero ability that he gets to choose to use for good or evil. And we all know he chooses good. So my question to you is as follows. What we want to know is, before the Olympics were even on the horizon, before the pilot, obviously before the accidents, before the book, before the TED Talks, before all of the things that people know you for today, who is Janine Shepherd?
Well, that's a great question. I was a tomboy.
Awesome.
I started my athletic career at the age of probably around 6 or 7. And let me tell you my superpower back then.
Oh, okay.
My superpower back then, and I would say this is a superpower that has saved my life, is I learned to love the hills.
The hills? Like a mountain?
Probably wondering. Yeah, well, you're probably wondering what that means.
Yeah.
And I always say to people when I speak, when I'm out there on stage, I always say, okay, for people and the listeners here, I'm sure everyone either they might go jogging or they might be walkers. They might have a preference to go walking. And so I say, well, if you go out for your morning ride or, walk, run, do you take the flat or do you take the hills? And invariably, people always come back and go, oh, the flats. We love the flats. And I say, that's what needs to change. Because when I was very young, just intuitively, I discovered when I was training with my athletic friends that we would go out and we would be running on the flat and we'd get to a hill and everybody would complain. Nobody liked the hills. And I thought to myself, this is my edge. This is where I can make a difference. Because if I can learn to love the hills, then it's not just going to make me physically stronger, which it did. It would make me mentally tough. And I learnt, and it's a great, superpower. So it did. I always trained on the hills, and it earned me a nickname from my fellow teammates of Jeannine the Machine, which not only rhymes, but I thought that was pretty cool. Jeannine, and they used to call me Machine, because whenever we got to the hills, I would just put my head down and I would actually go harder. I won a lot of races on the hills. That was where I actually won, and that was my edge. Yeah. So that's a superpower, loving the hills.
Got it. I get this. I like where you're headed with that. So, and you said that started at what age?
6 or 7, very early on.
Wow.
And the things, Jay, that I learned about the hills are not just, that it made me physically strong. It made me mentally tough. But one of the interesting things about loving the hills is that you recognize that the hills never stop. There's always another hill, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, because once you accept that life has hills, then the fact that life has hills doesn't matter anymore.
Got it. That's interesting, because I think we're going to be talking about this metaphor all the way through because I can hear where this is coming from. So take us on this journey, which clearly involves some hills. How do we go from, running to Olympic skier? Because last time I checked, Australia's not really known for skiing.
Yeah, I know. You're like, what? You have snow there? Yeah, we do. And back in my day, of course, we hadn't won any Olympic medals for skiing, but we have now for various winter sports. And I mean, again, it's like the 4-minute mile, isn't it? Like Bannister,
Right.
It's impossible till someone does it and then everyone does it. So, I guess, obviously Australia is thought of as not a winter sports country, but we actually have great conditions for cross-country skiing. We have medalists now. We've had gold medalists in moguls, aerial skiing, speed skating, various sports. Of course, it was tough back in my day because, I was going to be the Roger Bannister. I was going to be the one that won the first medal and showed the world that an Aussie could ski. So I had, obviously, as I said, started very young, 6 or 7, little athletic. So I was a track and field athlete and then got into other sports. I got into triathlons, marathon running, and eventually cross-country skiing, which is the ultimate endurance sport. So my goal was to not just, represent my country at the Olympics, but to put Australia on the map as a force to be reckoned with in winter sports. And I had been overseas skiing and racing, and I got on really well with the Canadian ski team. And the coach, Marty Hall, had said to me, I really believe in you. I think you can do this. So come and join up with our team and use our facilities in the lead up to the 88 Winter Olympics in Calgary. Wow.
Wow.
That was just an incredible, not just a compliment, but a great opportunity. So that's where I found myself, headed for the 88 Winter Olympics in Calgary when something happened that changed my life.
Yeah. Before we go there, though, I'm just going back to loving the hills again. I mean, you went from, you go straight to a sport that is all about hills all of a sudden.
Oh,
yes. That had to carry over to give you yet another strategic, if not, physical advantage because of just that mindset from the age of 7. By the way, your parents are awesome. If that, so it's like, wow, that I wouldn't think that naturally, but when you go, because the first thing I think about when skiing is, oh God, it's cold, and then there's a hill. But you're like, yes, give me that, bring me that thing that you consider to be difficult, and you will go conquer that mountain. How much did that help you? Is that part of why skiing appealed to you in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, it was tough, and it was, we had just changed over actually from with cross-country skiing to what they call a classical technique, where you can imagine that sort of style when you think of cross-country skiing, where someone's sort of running. That's the way I describe it, with wax, and so they'd grip to the snow, to what we call a freestyle skating technique. And with that, you put a glide wax on the bottom of your ski, and it was a grunt. You really had to get up that hill in a skating technique, which was hard. You needed to be super fit, super strong, and for me it was like perfect. This was just exactly what I wanted. Make the harder the better, and it sort of leveled the playing field too, because technique, with the classic technique where the Scandinavian countries really ruled the world, this sort of brought everyone back to a level playing field where everybody was starting at the same level, which is everybody was starting with having to learn how to skate. So this was, for me, I was coming into it at just the right time, and and I was built for cross country skiing. I was very strong, and it seemed to me like the start, the planets were aligning, and, I was going to do something great in this sport. And I was so focused, so dedicated, nothing was going to stop me.
Well, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs that are listening right now, or would be entrepreneurs that are listening, they can relate to that emotion, to that feeling of when that idea is beginning to take shape, and that future is like looking in front of you. You're like, man, I can't believe it. All of these tools, they're right here in front of me. In your case, I'm training with the Canadian team. This is not supposed to happen, but it's happening to me, and I am perfectly designed for this. I think a number of people can relate to that euphoric feeling, if you will, of the future is going to only go one direction. But yet, as we know, that's not always what life has in store for us. So tell us a little bit about exactly what happened, so that people can all understand exactly what you've been through.
Yeah. So setting the scene, as I've said, and as you've learned about me, I was completely focused and dedicated to the point of almost exclusion. It was very much one track. I'm going to the Olympics. Nothing's important. And most athletes at that level have to be very sort of self-centered and driven to get where they're going, which I was. So I'd come back to Australia after skiing and racing and making preparations to go and join the Canadian team in the lead up to the Olympics. I was on a training bike ride with my teammates, a combination of fellow skiing teammates and also a cycling group that I used to cycle with during off-season training. So riding from Sydney to west of Sydney to an area we call the Blue Mountains, and it was about a 6-hour ride, something we did frequently, a couple of times a year with this group. So we'd been on our bikes for around 5.5 hours, and we got to the part of the ride that I loved. And what was that, Jay?
Probably a really big hill. Going up.
It was it. Yes. And because I loved the hills, right? And, so I was actually I had, leading up to this, I'd actually been overtraining, so I was pretty tired that day. But I rallied. Here I was at the hills, my favorite part of the ride. Got up off the seat of my bike, and my last memory was looking up into the bright sun shining down on my face, and then everything went black.
Wow, that's wow. What was the next memory?
A long time later, I have to say I had, I'd been hit by a speeding truck, and I had extensive and life-threatening injuries. So for 10 days, I can tell you sort of what happened to my body and then what happened to me. I was taken to a hospital and flown by rescue helicopter down to a spinal unit in Sydney. Extensive and life-threatening injuries. I'd broken my neck and my back in 6 places, 5 ribs on my left side, my collarbone, my right arm, bones in my feet, head injuries, internal injuries. Lost around about 5 litres of blood, which is all someone my size would actually hold. And so the helicopter arrived at Prince Henry Hospital, and my blood pressure was 40 over nothing.
Whoa.
Yeah, so I wasn't supposed to survive. I had what I call a death experience. It wasn't a near-death experience. It was a death experience. So it's very difficult to talk about because it took me a long time, and still I don't really understand it. But for 10 days in intensive care, while the doctor said to my parents, she's, just prepare for the worst. We can't do any more for her. I was in another dimension. And it was a place of awareness where I knew that my body was broken. I also knew that I didn't want to return to my body. And it took me 10 days. And after 10 days, for reasons I'm not completely sure about, I did return to my body.
Wow. Okay. Now, you made a distinction, which I want to make sure that people hear, because this is key. You said you could tell us what happened to your body, and you could say what happened to you. And I think for a lot of people, when something they're not expecting, because I'm just going to go with you weren't expecting that, happens, when something like that happens, we collapse the two as one big event and in some different way. But you're making a distinction that I believe played a very strong role in your recovery. Can you help understand why that distinction might be necessary?
Well, that distinction comes in much later on when I talk about my TED Talk, which I have to tell you that I originally called that, you're not your body. So that was happening to my body, but, consciousness lives outside our body. And the easiest way to describe this is that, the consciousness had left my body, and I had an awareness very clearly of being able to make a choice to return to my body. And that choice, people often ask me, was that a choice? And I say, yes, it was. I was guided in this experience, and even though I was encouraged to return to my body, I didn't have to. I could have said no, but I did return. And I briefly touch on this experience in my book, Defiant, very, very briefly, but I don't talk at length about it because I don't think that that's the most important part of my story. The important part is what happened when I did return.
Yes, and we were getting to that, but before we talk about what happened, I want to know why you chose to return, because there was a reason.
There was, and at first I didn't know. At first I would say that, I later on, knew that and understood that my parents had been sitting by my bedside the whole time that I was in intensive care, holding my hand, willing me to stay. And in many ways, I feel that was an anchor to my body. But what I can say now is that this was an opportunity, an incredible opportunity, because before my accident, I was an athlete. I defined myself by my body. That was my strength. That's who I was. For me, the greatest incentive to learn not just who I was, but who I wasn't, would be to lose the thing that I thought defined who I was, which was my body.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, for me, the thing that pushed me into the search, into what I call my, the spiritual journey, the journey inside, to understand who I really was.
And this is what I'm going to call your superhero moment, because this is that moment, just like Peter Parker gets bit by the spider and he's got to now make a choice. You've been bit by a completely different type of spider, but you have a similar choice in front of you. There are people who make completely different choices after things like this to them than what you did. So tell us about some of those choices that you've decided to make, and more importantly, how that's played out and into you redefining who you are, and more importantly, the good you've been able to do inside the world today. Hey guys, thanks for listening as always, and I'm glad that you continue to support with each and every download and subscription and share. One of the things that I want to ask you though is, where are you listening to me from right now? I know some of you, maybe you're on a treadmill, maybe you're washing dishes, maybe you're walking that dog, and some of you are actually in a vehicle driving right now. One of the fun things that you can do, get some of your time back, is begin to living a car-free existence. But even then, it can be a little complicated. So one of the things that I want you to do is I want you to go over to Zipcar. Go to joinzipcar.com/cashflow diary. It's a way that I am able to still go get a car just for a few hours, very, very simply, so that if I have a lot of errands to run and sheets to drop off and running to the short-term rentals, or if I just want to go for a long trip up to LA and back, etc., I can rent a car for a very, very short period of time. And the cool part is I don't even have to pay for any gas. Again, go to joinzipcar.com/cashflow diary.
Well, when I chose to come back to my body, it was a choice. It was an overwhelming choice, because I was coming back to a broken body and a life of disability.
Well, yes.
So,
I mean, you were, that's the thing I'm sitting here thinking about. You're an athlete used to relating to life, everything, a certain way. If you're making this choice, the hill in front of you is probably the biggest one you've ever seen.
Oh my gosh, and so when I woke up, of course, the bleeding had stopped. They told my parents, the bleeding stopped. The next concern was whether she would walk again, because I was paralyzed from the waist down. So I spent almost, I had major spinal surgery. So the neck break was a stable fracture. The back was completely crushed. I had what's called a comminuted fracture. So if you can imagine, for those listening who might know a little bit about anatomy, the lumbar part of my back, L1, was completely crushed, didn't exist anymore. So they had to go in. They really cut me across, opened me up, and took out 2 of my broken ribs, and they rebuilt my back.
Wow.
So... yeah, and then they used ribs as a splint on either side, and they didn't know how that would turn out. They didn't know, how well that would fuse, or how much damage was already done to my spinal cord. So I spent almost 6 months in the spinal ward and got out in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk, covered in a plaster body cast attached to a catheter bottle, and I was told, I remember it very clearly. I had no idea. I thought, no, they're wrong. I'm going to the Olympics. It's going to be fine. And I remember the doctor saying to me, very matter-of-factly, Janine, I think that's a little unrealistic. She said, the damage is permanent. Your injuries are permanent. And I can remember her saying, you will never be able to do the things you did before.
Wow.
And, Jay, I left hospital and I was still convinced, no, they're wrong. And, it wasn't until I got home and I had a pretty significant meeting in a doctor's office at home where I realized that, maybe I'm wrong. Have I been kidding myself? It doesn't matter how much I'm trying to move my legs, I can't move them. And I got very, very depressed. Mm-hmm. And to the point of thinking I made a mistake coming back to my body. I really did. I don't want to be here. This is not my life. This is not what I've worked all my life for. And I felt like a prisoner in someone else's body.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you, I know there's a number of people who are like, that's exactly how I feel every time I go to work, depressed. I made a mistake, or that person who struck out, said, I'm gonna go make a business, and they started and they've cut some ties, and then it feels really, really soul crushingly hard. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I made the wrong choice, but yet. We know how your story obviously doesn't end there, and neither does yours. Those of you who are listening right now who might feel like that's the case. So what came into your existence to allow you to exit that we'll call that low moment?
Well, I can tell you, you hear a lot of people talk about the dark night of the soul or rock bottom. And boy, I can tell you that there was one night there after I'd been to, now I'm going to tell you a personal story. I was wheeled into a rehab doctor's office in my wheelchair. And this is a male doctor I'd never seen before. After I'd got home from hospital, my mother took me to a new hospital. And he said to me, he looked at me and he said, right. He said, let's talk about your sex life. And I was a 24-year-old woman, he a 50-something-year-old man, and I was very embarrassed. And I remember him looking at me and saying, you know what, it's, someone with spinal cord injury, it's tough, we need to talk about this. He said, you'll never have the big O again. Seriously.
Wow.
I was just horrified. And that pushed me over the edge. I remember I just sort of held back my tears. I remember going home and thinking, I have lost everything, not just, all of my dreams and hopes, but now he's put into question my ability to be a woman. And I just thought, what have I got left? And I remember that was about as low as I think I've ever been.
Right.
And here's the thing about rock bottom, I tell people, is that rock bottom doesn't show you who you are. It shows you who you're not. You very clearly get to look into the depths of your soul, and you have to be willing to do this because it's a very confronting place to go to. You ask the question, well, who am I? I had lost my body. If I'm not that, who am I? And why am I here?
Yeah. I mean, those are great questions. And I think it's a question that we often skip until we're placed into a situation in which we have no choice but to answer that question. So in that, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. And you only get there when you're willing to go. You have to. It's not about rearranging the externals. It's about rearranging the internals, and you have to be willing to go there.
Well, and what I like about it is that there's this situation when you are willing to answer that question, who am I? You get to now make conscious, intentional decisions about those answers if you're willing to face it. So I guess then the question I need to ask you is, who are you, Janine?
I'm not my body.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. Okay, I've lost everything. This is not, this is not who I am. I saw this glimpse of something inside that was still there.
Yes.
It was still there, even though I had lost my body, the ability to walk, to use the bathroom, to be a woman, to all of the things that they'd said I'd lost. There was something inside me that said, but you are still there.
Yeah.
Just search inside. That defiant spirit is alive. And that was a thing that really changed my life. And, also that, I recognized, okay, it was like I gave myself a pep talk. You love the hills.
Yeah.
And I decided right then, in the the very dark night of the soul, on my bedroom floor, I actually had a little prayer that I said into the darkness, and it went like this. It said, God, show me a way out of this, or show me a way through this. And I think that almost was like a cry to that part of me that had made the decision to come back. Show me another way of living my life.
And so from there, we go from the ground to the sky.
We did. And, I say that, we can sometimes hold on to our life so tightly, the things that we think define who we are. For me, it was my body. For other people, it could be, a relationship, their finances, their job, their home, their car, and if we tie our sense of worth to those things outside of us, we're doomed for failure, because anything can be taken from us. But the one thing that we can never lose, which is our defiant human spirit. And that realization changed my life. And, you've got to be willing, I love, I'm a great fan of Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. You've got to be willing to let go of the person you are, or the life you have, to get the life that's waiting for you. And often in life, it's this sort of dance, between sort of holding on, loosening our grip, holding on, loosening our grip. And sometimes life, and that's why I'm such a fan of, being able to sit in silence and have that time where you listen to the intuitive self, the higher self, to know when that time comes, And I basically that night said, okay, I let go of my dream of the Olympics, of, defining myself by my body, of all of that, and show me another way. And that opened me up. It was like opening my eyes to another way of not just being in the world, but seeing in the world.
It's almost like you gained an additional superpower, I would say, in that particular moment.
Yeah, new eyes to see.
And you've made many conscious decisions since then to be able to use this power for good. So describe for us, if you will, some of the things that you've been able to do post recovery.
Well, when I left hospital, my self-esteem had taken such a dive. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. I had to learn to use a catheter. It was tough. It was really hard. And so when I let go, the moment that what happened to me was, it was like I had a clean slate. Okay, now what else is available in this world? What other possibilities are available and open to me? And sitting outside in my wheelchair and my plaster body cast, an aeroplane flew over, and I sort of looked up, and in this completely crazy moment, I thought, okay, well, I can't walk, but maybe I can fly.
Just so you know, in the back of my head, the song "I Believe I Can Fly" is running right now. When you're saying this, it's like it's just awesome. I love it. Keep going though.
I know, and I didn't know there's a song. Is it Mary? What's her name? I can't remember the artist, because I didn't even know this song existed. But there's a song that is called "If I Can't Walk," or "Why Walk When You Can Fly." Do you know that song?
I do not.
Seriously, I'm sure it was written for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I sort of remember turning to Mum and saying, Mum, I think I'm going to learn to fly. And, it was like, oh, that's nice. And everyone thought it was crazy, but the seed was planted. So weeks later, in my plaster body cast, my mum and my friend drove me out to the local airport. They carried me into the flying school. Wow. And they took one look at me and thought, who is
why
this?
are you here?
Exactly.
Right.
Sorry, the hospital's down the road. And, I said, I'm here for my flight. And I had booked in for what's called a TIFF, a trial instructional flight. I believe in America you call it a discovery flight. So they took me down, drove me down, lifted me into a light aircraft. Now, I had never, ever wanted to learn to fly in my life. It was never on my radar. They lifted me into the airplane, and it was just overwhelming. I was like, oh, my goodness. And I remember the instructor taking off that day, and the wheels lifting off the runway, and it was just the most exquisite feeling. It was just joyful, and the instructor let me fly that day with my hands. I couldn't move my legs, and it was just this incredible, there's no greater metaphor for freedom than flying. And from being paralyzed in a spinal ward to I'm flying an aeroplane. watch me, and it was incredible. And at that moment I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn to fly.
Yeah. And okay, so let's fast forward a bit. And I just want to make sure, because I know for me, these moments, when you go through something that what you've been through, you can feel like, okay, I can check off all the bad stuff that's ever going to happen to me, and I'm done with that. So clearly, now that you are, you're in the airplane, you're going through this process, you're learning, to fly, like literally learning to fly. Nothing bad has happened since then, right?
Don't you remember, Jay? I told you the hills never stop.
Exactly. That's exactly what I wanted you to talk about. That's exactly what I was talking about. The hills never stop. So even though you've gone through difficult stuff, even though we go through difficult stuff, we don't get just one hill. The hills never stop. So what happens
and
next?
Let me tell you, the magic happens on the other side of the hill. So, for everyone listening, I learned to fly. Of course, I didn't even know if I'd pass a medical then. So we're going to fast forward. I went on. I continued to fly. That gave me the inspiration. It was what I call, it was like igniting my pilot light. I was, oh my God, I can do this. So that gave me the motivation to get out of bed every day. Every day I got out of bed. I got my training diary out. I started writing. I started exercising. At that stage, at first, I could just lie on the ground and lift my legs probably an inch off the ground. Practice my walking, and I went from two people, being held up, to walking around the house, the furniture, to eventually being able to walk on my own. My plaster cast was replaced by a metal brace on my back. And all the time, my mum would drive me out to the airport, and I would go flying with the instructor, and he would do the legs, the rudder pedals. I would do the hands until my legs were strong enough to be able to just, reach and use the pedals. And I eventually got what's called my restricted license. Then I learned to navigate, flew around Australia with friends, got my unrestricted. And then I'm going to fast forward because there's a lot of story here, and I write about that too in my book. I eventually went on and got my commercial pilot's license, my night rating, my twin engine rating, my instrument rating, my instructor rating, and then I found myself, I even think, well, how did I do this? This is extraordinary. Then I found myself working, given a job at the same place I went for that first flight, working as a flying instructor, teaching other people how to fly in around 18 months after I'd left the spinal ward.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So again, loving the hills. Got it.
Yeah. And let me tell you, I'm still a paraplegic. I'm a walking paraplegic. So I did all of that while I have no feeling in my legs, while I had to learn to catheter, while I had to have medication. I did all of that. Because, there was nothing stopping me. There was this pilot light, this defiant spirit inside of me that was burning so bright, nothing could stop me.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Just remove excuses while you're at it, but keep going. Keep going. This is awesome. But I guess what it comes down to is you were still that person this is that Olympian coming out in a completely different way, because it was inside of you from the beginning. Loving the hill. You don't really care what kind of hill's in front of you. You're just going to go conquer it.
Yeah. I recognized that I'd made a choice to come back to my body, as we all have, but I'm very aware of that choice. And so I'm not going to waste a moment of this precious gift that I've been given.
Well, what's also interesting to me is that getting back to normal wasn't enough. You wanted beyond that. And sometimes we can be so low, like 0 would be great. Like if I could just get back there, that'd be awesome.
I know. And Jay, the interesting thing is, I did it in many ways. I sort of felt like I had a lot of things to prove to all the people, the naysayers that said I wouldn't do it, But, in all honesty, the only person I had to prove anything to was myself.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's true for everybody. It just takes interesting circumstances for us to even come close to realizing that. So, what happens next?
Well, there I was in this completely new life that, if someone had said to me earlier, you're going to have to live a life without your sport, I would have thought, no way, that was
Right.
who I was. So I'd found this sense of incredible achievement, but joy also in having, reinvented my life. And I think that's the interesting thing. That's a really interesting word because, often we hold on to things and we think that's the life I want. And it doesn't matter what we lose in life, and life is about stages. You can go through life, you go through young adulthood, and even approaching middle age. Life changes all the time. Life is about change, and change is actually a great thing. I say it's nature's way of often improving, making things better, and often we don't like change. But here I had experienced this overwhelming change and found that, wow, this is great. Not only have I learned so much about myself, but what I'm capable of. I've created this new life, which I love. I'd learned this new skill, and it was extraordinary. And then, of course, I decided that I'd write a book about it. And once again, I wrote this book for myself. My first book in Australia. So I've written many books in Australia, but my first book I called Never Tell Me Never because I thought that was, everyone had said, you'll never do this, you'll never do that. And of course that, again, then launched me into this new career, which was, being on the speaking circuit and, writing my journey and that, again, opened me up to so much, to a bigger story. I say that we can get so stuck in our small story. Why me? This shouldn't be happening to me. And when I wrote my first book, of course, in Australia, it became an instant bestseller, and 60 Minutes did a story. And eventually, it was turned into a movie. So in Australia, my story's been made into a movie. And then it sort of opened this floodgate of people reaching out to me with their stories. And what that did for me was took me out of my small story and into a bigger human story where I realized that I wasn't the only one going through this. That has been a tremendous part of my healing.
Now, when you say never tell me never, what are some of the other nevers that you were told that you've since gone on to accomplish?
Well, of course, that I would never live, that I would never walk, that I would never be able to do the things I did before. That I would never have children, never have children. I'm the mother of three. So, and here's the interesting thing about
now that's a big hill, by the way.
Yeah, that's a big one, particularly because I'm a woman with a disability. I have three incredible, very compassionate, empathic children. So I actually love it. I think it's a gift, actually, when someone says you'll never do something because, you think you're proving, obviously, as I said, you think you've got something to prove to them, but only to yourself. And that's, I say, don't let anyone else set limitations. Create your own life and decide what you can and you can't do. Because often, we listen to what other people say that is possible for our lives. And, we need to really just stay really focused on our own authentic path.
Yeah. Here's what I know. There's more to your story than we have time for.
It's a pretty big story.
I'm just like, I'm like, we could keep going and going, and I can see why it can be a movie really easily. Even the movie probably left out parts that were important because they just had to. There's so much here. So, and with that being said, we know that you've got a book out. Definitely want to make sure that those who want to either, find out more about what you're up to and or just pick up a copy of the book, what's going to be the best way for them to connect more with your story?
Well, I just love hearing other people's stories and connecting with people. They can go to my website, JannineShepherd.com, and Defiant is available there with Amazon and Barnes & Noble. I'm also on, Twitter and Facebook and those Instagram, I have to say. That's a new thing for me. But, I would say for anyone, so my other books have been, periods of my life. Defiant brings people up to date with where I am now. And it's another great thing is that I packed up. I had more and more hills and setbacks in my life. And 3 years ago, after my TED Talk, I had received an email from a man in India, of all places. And he'd said to me, I've had an ailment for 19 years. And he said it was so bad that I was thinking about suicide. He said, but I saw your talk today and my life starts now. He said, pray for me. And that was this seminal moment where I thought, oh my gosh, I can't, I've got to spread my wings. And I'd suffered more setbacks in my life, which I write about, and I won't go into that now. And so I did what anyone would do. I gave everything away. I packed my bags and I moved across the world.
Of course, that makes perfect sense.
Why not? And so here I am. I've been living in America for 2.5, almost 3 years now. And, I knew that I had to continue to share my story. And that's, where I am now. And I've written this book, Defiant, in the hope that people can hear my message and also see, I consider myself a mirror, that people can see their own potential. Indeed. And their own defiant human spirit.
Indeed. And I think the right person has indeed listened this far. They have indeed heard your message today. And I just want to be the first one to say thank you for being who you are, and not only being, but also being willing to go about and share it, because that takes a whole extra set of courage, and that's a hill unto itself. And being able to, share your knowledge, your insight, and the wisdom that you've gained, and doing so here with us today at the Cashflow Diary.
Thank you so much, Jay. It's been just an absolute pleasure speaking with you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know what time it is. It's time for you to move at the speed of instruction. What does that mean? That means go over to JannineShepherd.com. Why? Because you know good and well she removed every excuse you were already thinking about. And more importantly than that, you want to know more about the story, because there's more, which is amazing. Understand this, though. There are hills, but learning to love them can make an intense difference on your journey to answering the question, who am I? Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun talking to you today. I look forward to talking to you soon. Until next time.